Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Can I go with them? Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Redford, and this is the follow-up. Coming up on tonight's show, climate change and dealing with its impact. It's under constant debate. Transitioning to 100% clean, renewable energy by 2035 is one of the goals being supported by proponents. So what's that going to take? Relying on alternative energy resources like wind, solar, electric for starters, and phasing out coal. And what about the Green New Deal legislation? It certainly has elements to keys to climate change, but Congress won't pass it. What's happening there? Two experts on energy and the environment will join us tonight on the follow-up. But first, we would like to hear from you to help drive the conversation here on the show. You can do that in a variety of ways via social media on Facebook and Twitter. You can email us, or you can dial into our follow-up hotline to voice your opinion or suggest future show topics. And if you'd like to watch any of our past shows this season, just log on to deltapublicmedia.org. We have two guests tonight, one right here in the studio, Jason Hayes. He is Director of Energy Environmental Policy for the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. First timer to the show, glad to see you.
Thanks for having me on, Mike.
And on dialing in live remote, we have Brandon Hoffmeister. He is the Senior Vice President of Government, Regulatory, and Public Affairs for Consumers Energy. Brandon, do you hear me? Are you there? Well, we're in the process of trying to dial Brandon in, so I will move to Jason Hayes and get to Brandon somewhere in the middle of the show if we get to that. So let's talk about the future and the stability of the power grid in this nation and locally. In the last month or so here in Michigan, we've had some significant power outages related to some severe storms. Michigan lawmakers were kind of called some of the power companies onto the carpet, DTE and Consumers Energy both, in terms of that. And so where are you in terms of the stability of the power grid? Some would say, you know what, they've been happening, the power outages have been happening a lot more frequent and they're a lot longer. What's your take on that?
Yeah, that's what we definitely at the Mackinac Center are arguing that. What we're seeing, and we'll see probably hear from Brandon and others, the big utilities are going through what they call a transition. As you noted, they're trying to shut down things like coal, in some cases even shutting down nuclear. They typically couch those plans in concerns over climate change and wanting to reduce emissions, that sort of thing. So their plan, once they get the big reliable older plants shut down, is they want to go to renewable energy. Wind and solars, the two big ones that they typically bring up. And so what I've been arguing is that wind and solar just are not there yet. The technology is not capable of really powering an industrial society like ours. So we're concerned. As you noted, we're starting to see some blackouts. We're seeing a more fragile grid, outages. The winter storm Uri in February 2021, Texas went black for as much as 5 days. You had literally millions of people without electricity. Seeing a lot of those things. California every summer, same sort of thing. Whenever it gets hot, demand for air conditioning, and that mixes with solar. When the sun goes down, solar doesn't work. So when the sun is going down, people are coming home from work and they're turning on their air conditioners, their TVs, their stoves. All of that starting to hit right at around the same time as we're now seeing utilities also say that we're going to phase out of other things like fossil fuels in that, and we're going to start using more electric vehicles. So we're seeing a lot of new additions in demand onto the grid at the same time as we're removing the old reliable sources and trying to go to far less reliable, newer sources.
Sure. You mentioned the power outages in Texas,
Correct.
in California, elsewhere. So Michigan with the 4 seasons, severe winter, are we any different? Are we more vulnerable to the outages because of where we live and the climate here, do you think?
In some ways, the ice storm that happened in
Yeah.
February is a good example of that. That is typically a maintenance issue. So I'm sure Brennan would be able to speak to this too, that it's trees falling down and hitting the lines. But one of the
Right.
points that I make is if the utilities weren't spending the money on wind and solar and instead were maintaining the existing plants and throughout their full life cycles and looking at either maintaining or building new nuclear plants, nuclear and natural gas essentially is what we argue for, then we would have that stability, that large base load, always on supply, and we'd be able to focus a bit more of the money that's being spent on wind and solar
Right.
onto line maintenance and tree maintenance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you had mentioned in your comment about phasing out coal, and just recently in the last couple of weeks, Consumers Energy did talk about a goal of phasing out all of their coal plants by 2025, which is
Right.
about 15 years ahead of what they thought in the beginning.
Correct. Yeah.
I think you probably think that's maybe too ambitious, and then the question also becomes, what do we replace it with?
Right.
We mentioned wind, solar, maybe natural gas is in their portfolio, but I think
Yes.
you're saying it may be too ambitious given the alternatives at the moment, right?
Right, and what we're arguing, not ourselves, not Mackinac alone, but several other in the energy industry are arguing at the same time is if we retain those working plants, the Campbell plant is the big coal plant that Consumers wants to
Right.
shut down. If we retain those for the extra 15 years, that would give time for other technologies like small modular nuclear to progress. And then what you can end up doing is basically, if you shut down the coal plant, you remove that and you put in a small modular nuke in its place, or two, and you can kind of daisy chain them and get very similar results. But you've already got the infrastructure sitting there, you know it's reliable, and very different. Nuclear just runs 24/7, 365, compared to wind and solar, which are on and off and on and
Sure,
off.
sure.
So it's a very different thing. And when you're relying on wind and solar like that, you have to have something like natural gas, which is easy to, it's called ramping. You can turn on a turbine or
Sure.
it's an internal combustion engine, a reciprocating, they're called RICE engines. You can fire them up really fast or shut them off really fast, which is what you need when you're relying on wind and solar, which is always on, always off,
Right.
on, off, on, off. So you have to have that reliable stuff sitting, waiting in the background so that you can keep the lights on throughout the difficult weather.
Good point. I think we're going to have some graphics on renewable energy and where we're going, and it connects to this conversation. I'm going to try to do that in a moment.
Sure.
In the meantime, I'm being told in my headset that we might have Brandon Hoffmeister. Brandon, are you there? Okay, I'm guessing not. May not be our night for that.
We'll get there.
So Bob, back in the production area, do you have the graphic on the renewable energy sources that maybe we can take a peek at? Yeah, increasing renewables. In the latest government energy outlook, it is expected that increased U.S. power generation for new renewables, which you've been talking about, mostly wind and solar, will reduce generation from both coal-fired and natural gas-fired power plants in 23 and 24.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to touch on that. I've got more.
Okay, keep going.
Okay.
we'll add to it.
With new solar and wind projects coming online this year, forecasts for these two energy sources will account for 16% of total generation in 2023, up from 14% last year and 8% in 2018. So we're putting our ducks on that.
Right.
Okay.
And so I always find those numbers amusing because essentially what's happened is government has worked to disallow the existing reliable stuff. They're shutting down the big coal plants. They're limiting the amount of natural gas you can use, and even in some cases, like the Palisades nuclear plant, they're shutting down nuclear plants. Okay, and then they mandate renewables, and then they start presenting statistics like that. Like, look at all the new renewable capacity we're bringing in. So you go, okay, well, you've outlawed one and you've mandated the other. So.
Sure.
Obviously, that's what's going to happen. But when you look big picture, federal government, Energy Information Administration numbers show that for total primary energy demand, not just electricity, but also transportation fuels and all that sort of thing, wind and solar still only provide 4.5% of our total primary energy demand after 40 plus years of pushing these. So before the show, we were talking about the scale of some of these changes. These are massive systems that we're trying to change, and it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, and the viewers are showing something that there's a graphic that's a little bit out there, but there you can read some of that when you look at from 28 to 24. Natural gas is at the top, but it's sort of going down. Coal clearly is going down.
Yes.
Nuclear looks like it's sort of
pretty
steady, and then of course you see the wind and solar we've been talking about.
Correct.
Still very, very low, but obviously, like Consumers Energy and others feel that curve's going to change, right?
Correct.
It just gives viewers a little bit of what we have out there.
Yeah, and that's electricity generation. So that's just looking at electricity where I was talking about primary energy demand. But the one thing that you'll notice with that is that natural gas is at the top, because you can't rely on wind and solar unless you have natural gas ready, waiting right there to make up for the lulls, basically, when wind stops blowing or the sun stops shining. You need something reliable.
Right. I think I have one more graphic, then I'll move on to something else. Bob, you got something else for us to look at there? I think I got one more after this. And there it is. Increasing renewables again. In contrast, our forecast share of generation from coal falls from 20% in 22 to 18% in 23.
Okay.
The forecast share from natural gas declines from 39 to 38. So, I mean, we're not getting away from natural gas totally, but it looks like the trend is that we're going to rely on that less. Clearly, coal is something that we're getting away from, at least in this country. Other countries, obviously, are still relying on it.
Yeah, China and India are building massive amounts of coal right now. So where we're switching, and the amusing part of China building so much is China uses that reliable coal energy to make the solar panels that we then are buying and installing over here. So, you know, the green arguments in my mind are kind of amusing, because we're using coal in China to build our solar panels so that we can pretend that we're green over here in North America. And it's not really a strong argument in my estimation.
Sure. We talked about this before, that you know, automakers are all in. They're moving toward this.
Right.
That's also where the government is right now, the current administration. They're all in on this green energy way. And the automakers they have divisions for it. They're going in that direction. Right now they're sort of losing money on it, but in time they'll get there. How much of this is just like, okay, I mean, this is where the government's going, this is where the administration's going, so we as an auto company are going, well, we have to go into that thing. Are they being held hostage by that a little bit?
I think to some extent they are forced to go along with the program, because that is what the federal government, the state government are both doing. So they can't, they're operating in this legal framework. They can't not do that. But at the same time, what we're seeing is, you know, basically we're putting the cart ahead of the horse, because these technologies really aren't ready for prime time in a lot of ways. I mean, you'll pick up any newspaper, the Wall Street Journal has published stories about, you know, their authors, their freelance authors trying to drive from Chicago to New Orleans, and, you know, a four-day trip, they spent more time at electric car chargers than they did driving. So, you know, you're looking forward and you think, yeah, okay, eventually we may get there. But again, these systems they're big systems. There's, you know, tens of millions of vehicles on the road. There's, you know, a lot of these issues. It's just going to take a long time.
Right.
So in these situations, what I kind of liken it to is we're jumping off a cliff before we've invented the parachute. And we hope that by the time we hit the ground, the parachute will be ready. That's essentially what we're doing with these big changes to our electricity system, to our vehicles, and all that sort of thing. So we need these things to not only just be comfortable, but to stay alive, for our economy to run, for all of these sorts of things to actually work. we need reliable energy. We need reliable transportation. And for the next several decades, that's going to require fossil fuels and nuclear.
Yeah, and some of these automotive companies, I'm thinking about Ford that has a big selling truck. They continue to build that. They've got to make money by building combustion engines. We're seeing that continue to roll, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, again, as I said before the show, Ford F-Series trucks, Ford just put out a big announcement that F-Series trucks are the most popular selling vehicle in the nation. Not the most selling truck, the most popular selling vehicle. And so they said they sold over 640,000 units of F-Series trucks. Compare that to every single EV sold in the country of all makes and all models was about 800,000. So just Ford pickups are selling as many as all the EVs. So again, we don't make these changes overnight. This is going to take decades.
Right. So Brandon, are you listening to this conversation, and are you there?
I am. Can you hear me, Mike?
Yes, I can. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but I've got you on. So we touched on a couple different things, and about the stability and the future of the power grid. We've also talked a little bit about power outages. So I'm going to come to you with Consumers Energy again. Brandon Hoffmeister, Senior Vice President of Government, Regulatory, and Public Affairs for Consumers Energy. We've had a few power outages, the result of some severe winter storms here in the last month, which has called on the question of the reliability of the state's electrical grid. Before we get into that on your end, can you address some of those outages? Some will say they're happening a lot more frequent and they're a little bit longer. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we definitely are noticing a trend in more extreme weather. When you look at it over the past 5 or 10 years, wind speeds in severe storms, our system is designed to handle wind up to about 40 miles an hour pretty easily. Once you get past that, it gets challenging for the poles and the wires to stand up to the potential of major oak trees falling on them and things like that. And so we have seen when we look at the weather trends over the past several decades that there is an uptick in extreme weather that is hitting Michigan and really the rest of the country. And so we are definitely working to strengthen our electric grid. We're investing billions of dollars on an annual basis to make our grid smarter and more resilient. But at the same time, our grid, we have nearly 100,000 miles of electric wire across Michigan. So it takes sustained investment over several years and several decades to give us the reliable and resilient grid that we all want, that our customers deserve. But we are definitely focused on that and focused on getting people. The focus is really prevent outages as much as possible, and then when an outage happens, get people's power on as quickly as possible. And so we are definitely committed to doing that.
And that's why you're kind of on the show. You're educating and informing your consumers on Consumers Energy, but also it sounds like it's trying to educate some of our lawmakers too with term limits, and some need to have a little bit more experience and educate a little bit more on the power grid and energy overall, right?
Yeah, it's certainly, we had the opportunity last month to go up to Lansing and testify in both the House and the Senate Energy Committee, where lawmakers had a lot of questions about how to make the grid more resilient, how to make it more reliable, what it's going to take. And so, that's something that, we're an open book. We're happy to have those conversations with anybody that wants to have them. So thanks for having me on the show tonight.
So I'll touch on this as you move into this direction of renewable energy sources, phasing out coal plants by 2025, which is about 15 years ahead of what you originally forecasted, and what you're going to do to sort of replace that. And some would say that, boy, that's really ambitious and it's too fast, too soon to do that sort of move. Can you talk about the decision making on that?
Yeah, it was definitely not something that we took lightly. When we do this planning, we do it years in advance, and we run literally thousands of different computer simulations about what the potential grid might look like. And what we came up with, we're really proud that we think we've got a plan that balances reliability with affordability and with moving to cleaner sources of energy. And so coal has had a long history. It's had a great history in our country of providing reliable and affordable power supply. The fact of the matter is, recently the economics of coal are pretty challenged. And part of that is due to environmental regulations on coal. Part of that is due to other market forces. But it is not the sort of cheap fuel that it once was. And so when we look at what's best for our customers, both for their wallets and to make sure that the grid stays reliable, we're investing in a mix of different things. We feel natural gas, as Jason mentioned, is a really important piece of the fuel mix to ensure that 24/7 reliability going forward. So our plan invests more in natural gas generation going forward. But we also see a role for renewables. Renewables, the price of renewables has come down pretty substantially. It's definitely true that the wind doesn't blow all the time, the sun doesn't shine all the time. But when they're there, they can be a cheap, no fuel cost of energy. And so we are continually, gradually feathering in renewables every year, and we think that mix is going to work for Michigan for years to come.
Okay, Jason, you want to follow up on that? I know you touched on some of that, but what were some things maybe that he just talked about that maybe you'd like to follow up on?
Sure. For the cost of renewables, there's no doubt that they are getting cheaper, but a lot of people don't understand the reason that renewables are primarily reasons is there's tax subsidies basically that go toward wind and solar. So when people may not see the costs of these energy sources on their utility bill, but they are seeing it on their tax bill. So you're paying for it anyway. It's just a matter of it's coming from a different line in the budget. So the notion that wind and solar are cheaper than other options like gas or even nuclear or even coal, I question, because any of the areas where wind and solar are put in large amounts, like California, like Europe, any of those places, overall costs go up. And so the big problem that you're facing with wind and solar is if you only look at where the wire comes out of the wind turbine or where the wire comes out of the solar panel, that's one thing. But because of their inherent intermittency, their unreliability, they impose a lot of costs on the rest of the system that other parts of the system have to pay for. So they need a lot more transmission. Transmission lines are not cheap to build. That gets added to people's utility bills. Like I said, you need natural gas running in the background when wind and solar are running or powering the system, because you don't always know when the wind is going to stop blowing. You can generally tell when the sun is going to stop shining, unless it's a cloudy day or something like that. But when they stop or they underproduce, then you need that gas running in the background. So you end up paying for two systems, basically. You have to have the old system running and all the infrastructure associated with that, and now the new system that has to be paid for as well. So wherever you use a lot of them, overall costs go up.
So Brandon, did you hear some of what Jason had to say there?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So just to follow up on some of that, I mean, obviously you've done the research, the data, you've got the timelines. I think you guys are pretty confident. You're going in a pretty good direction here with your portfolio, I guess.
Yeah, we are. For consumers, we're proud. We went through we're heavily regulated by the state, and we went through a process that kind of had a bunch of different stakeholders over the past. I guess it finished up about a year ago, and that process took over a year. We proposed a plan that we thought was the best for Michigan, and we were thankful to get several different stakeholders, whether it was business groups, whether it was customer groups, whether it was the staff experts at the Michigan Public Service Commission, our regulators, all align on what we think is the best plan for Michigan. And as I said, natural gas certainly continues to play a really important role in providing reliable and affordable power, but we do think we can feather in low-cost renewables to that. And I would disagree with Jason that I don't think it necessarily means we're paying for a double the production. It just means that we're having a diverse grid that has a bunch of different resources, and that's that's going to make us stronger. I totally take the point that the federal government does subsidize renewables pretty heavily, but from our perspective, that is the federal law. So if they're going to be offering our customers a discounted price on energy generation, we're going to try to bring as much of that money to Michigan as we can.
Okay, the last part, we only have a couple minutes here. I wanted to talk a little bit about the governor's MI, Healthy Climate Initiative, reduce carbon emissions, promote clean energy jobs, and support infrastructure to prepare for natural adversity. So, Brandon, I'll start with you in a moment here. I'm sure you're aware of the governor's initiative. Did you have a hand in drafting it? Are you aligned on the same place with the governor's doing on this initiative?
Yeah, so the governor about a year ago issued the My Healthy Climate Plan. I think many of the concepts in there we did have the ability to weigh in on, and we broadly support a number of the initiatives in that plan. Probably not every I and T, there are some details where we might differ slightly on, but the overarching initiative we think can be a positive thing for Michigan. You got to balance in this transition. Yes, most folks want to move to cleaner energy, but as Jason has mentioned, you got to balance that with the need to keep energy affordable and reliable. And that's really the details and the nuance of that are sort of sometimes easier said than done, and that's the hard work of ensuring Michigan has a great energy system for all of our people.
Sure, Jason, I'll let you close on that, on kind of what he had to talk about with this healthy climate initiative, or anything else here.
Sure. The biggest thing that I would say with My Healthy Climate Plan is that I would personally question some of the assumptions in it. Like Brandon said, not every I, not every T. I probably have a few more I's and T's that I disagree with. But the big thing is that we need to, if we're going to keep Michigan competitive, we need that reliable, affordable energy. So in a nutshell, what I argue for is we should be using natural gas and nuclear far more than we are using wind and solar.
All right. That's the last word. Brandon, thank you for coming on. I'm glad we got you. Apologize for the technical difficulties, but we appreciate your input there and joining us tonight. Jason, you as well. Appreciate it. Good discussion. We'll do it again.
Thank you.
Great to be with you. Thanks, Michael.
And that's our show for tonight. In fact, this is our final show of our 6th season. We look forward to seeing you again in the fall with Season 7 of The Follow-Up. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for your support of Delta Public Media.